What's the craziest thing you've overheard on a plane? A 2-hour domestic argument circling around the man's arrogance and the woman's bitchiness. They were told before takeoff if they didn't cut their shirt they'd be kicked off the plane, and they did until about 20 minutes after takeoff, then they were just bitching at each other the entire flight. They were going to Croatia to see the man's homeland as he called it, but I got the impression this was a recent revelation as she kept correcting him on his own family history. Your grandpa wasn't from, dumbass, he was from, I wanted the plane to crash. Sitting on a plane in Chicago, waiting for takeoff. There was a delay so the guy across the aisle was talking on his phone, very loudly. He looked familiar, AMD was wearing a hat from a company in my hometown. I end up overhearing his entire conversation in which he proceeded to shit-talk my brother, whom he indirectly works with. We were over 500 miles from home. He was using full names, details that couldn't be misconstrued, it was hilarious. I wanted to call him out on it but he looked a lot crazy so I kept quiet. Young American guy beside me on the plane flying to EU to meet his girlfriend and future in-laws. It must have been his first international flight and he overdid the free booze. He started getting a bit loud and leery so I went up to go to the loo so said the air steward could I sit up here for a bit till he falls asleep. Thankfully I did. But getting off he nearly fell over down the gangway. And he was about to meet his future in-laws. I was changing flights else I would have loved to see the look on their face. Want me to kick his ass? Said by the friend of the man who kept refusing to turn his phone off before takeoff. Pilot had to come back and warn him it was his last chance. The passenger next to him kept telling the FA he had his phone on still. Everything seemed settled and then randomly toward the end of the flight the two parties involved decided a fight was in order and a light brawl occurred somewhere near Las Vegas. Once we landed at LAX we went right to the gate and they were arrested and taken off the plane on a flight from London to Singapore departing London around 11 p.m. About 5-6 hours into the flight the lights which had been dimmed, suddenly illuminated, klaxons sounded, and over the intercom came the announcement grab an oxygen mask. If you are not in your seat, seat in the nearest available seat and grab an oxygen mask. The only oxygen mask was one which the cabin crew had released for an elderly aisle passenger 2 rows behind me when he boarded. He had to have been exceedingly nervous at that point. I was sitting next to a dad and his daughter who was about 5. He was super cool and was chatting away while his daughter started talking to me. She was so sweet and bubbly, and gave way I had much information to me. She said something along the lines of I went to my grandma and grandpa's house and they're married. I wish my dad would marry my mom but they can't talk to each other but I always wish they were married like my grandma and grandpa. Her dad would have been horrified. And I was just sad. There was a man on the opposite side of the aisle a few rows ahead of me. He was wearing an old army jacket and seating profusely, all the while getting up out of his seat and checking into his bag in the overhead compartment. Flying makes me anxious anyway, so this was freaking me out. Then, a flight attendant walked up to me and whispered, "Is that guy behaving oddly?" I nodded. "So," she said, "well, keep an eye on him, and let me know if he does anything else strange." WTF, I lived in Thailand and the sex tourism there really can't be overstated. So many ugly old white dudes with Thai women. Anyway I was flying from Chiang Mai with an overweight pasty white guy who I assumed was with a prostitute. They were arguing about money and I heard him say, "I gave it all to you." Then he stated taking out bills and just shoved her in his face. Then he eventually scoffed and gave me a look like, "Uck whores, what can you do, buddy?" Hour-long plane trip from Dothan, Alabama to Atlanta. Sat in front of 2 guys arguing the validity of demon possession. One believed that it wasn't a possession per se, but merely the devil interfering with your thoughts. The other believed it was an actual demon possession, and he knew people that did exorcisms which solved the problem. It was a fascinating philosophical discussion. I was entertained for the full hour. The world is different down south. I've got a good one. Woman behind me in an aisle seat tells her husband, who was directly opposite her in the aisle seat, that it was good to see their daughter and new baby. Then she goes on in minute detail how it's good to breastfeed and that their daughter is doing so well because she is breastfeeding and her uterus is shrinking. She goes on, loudly, for about 10 minutes, as her husband is sliding down in the seat from embarrassment. Allahu Akbar technically wasn't on the plane, it was on one of those boarding tube gangways they use from the terminal to aircraft, but some drunk idiot who couldn't have been a week over 22 years old was walking with his family and yelled that shit. Didn't cause a delay for the departure or anything, but he was reprimanded by both staff and family to not raise his voice again. It had very little to do with the content or language of he spoke. Oh man, this is my question. On a trip back from Hawaii, some random woman took pictures of another woman's kid, I think it was either a baby or a toddler, and the mother in question started complaining about it so much, it delayed the flight by what was probably like 10 minutes. It was so annoying. Even if I understood the frustration, Lord knows what our photographer friend was doing, but I agree it was probably something weird. I was on a flight back from Spain and there was a tall, dark Middle Eastern looking guy very nervous a few rows it was time to land at Manchester, England. He locked himself in the toilet and would not come out. Just before touchdown he came out and sat. Air hostess went and checked the toilet out and found a torn up passport he was trying to flush. Police boarded the plane and took his ass away. Have a buddy who's flown many times and is comfortable with it, but he said one time he heard an older 80s lady talking about how easy it would be for her to sneak a bomb on the plane. She apparently went into detail with her gals about how exactly she would do it. He said he didn't really worry BC, it sounded like she was joking, but it made him uneasy because of how simple she made it sound. Lol. Everyone is boarded and the plane is in the middle of the taxi when a kid about 10 seats up and on the left side, I was on right side, starts crying and screaming at the top of his lungs, I need to poop and I'm going to poop, over and over again until the seatbelt signs came off. I've never seen so many worried faces and the look of panic as the mother picked up the kid and bolted to the toilet. On an Aegean flight from Athens, and a baby toddler apparently was repeatedly kicking the guy's chair in front of him. The guy got up and was angry, threatened to kill the baby. The other father yelled back, threatened to press charges, and they were yelling and ready to fight. They had to be separated. The flight continued and by the end of the trip, they apologized and it was resolved. I was flying solo into Orlando. The woman next to me was so excited about her new boyfriend's boat and was going on and fucking on about how excited she was for this trip. I nodded and put my headphones in, and about 1 minute later, she grabbed the cord on my headphone and pulled it out of my ear so she could blather on about it. I asked her if she had lost her motherfucking mind. Didn't hear but smell. There was a passenger ahead of us who kept passing radioactive farts. I never would believed in my life that people will survive after smelling them. That was a very awful flight. It was about 4 hours or something. We reached the hotel exhausted as hell from the toxic fumes he was passing. We could not go out, that day was a waste. F that man. This isn't crazy, but it's definitely the most fun I've had on a plane. This guy introduced himself as Caribbean boy, chatted with nearly everyone on the plane, asked them what their plans were, complimented everyone, then started singing Bob Marley type stuff. He had most of the passengers clapping along, everyone was smiling. Most charismatic man I ever met. While boarding, there was a guy in his 20s sitting next to a solo mom with an infant. Infant is crying. Guy loudly asks her, "Can you shut that fucking thing up?" There was a gasp in unison of every mother within 5 rows forward and back. A fowl was within earshot and immediately intervened by removing him and finding someone willing to switch seats with him. 2 guys next to me gloating to each other about how they brutally beat their wife and kids. Then they went on to discuss what would be a reasonable cause to murder them, like if they cheated or stole from you or something. They were giggling like school children. They definitely did not realize I spoke Spanish and probably thought I couldn't understand them. I had this woman next to me who talked constantly with someone sitting in front of me the entire time, being super loud and annoying. When we finally landed after 3 hours, she told her friend what a pleasant plane ride this has been. I thought to myself, fuck no. Me and my girlfriend sometimes just say that phrase whenever annoying noisy stuff happens. I once was flying back home from Washington DC on a relatively short flight. The woman sitting next to me had a whole bunch of angry, profanity-filled texts and emails open that were written to her ex-husband. I didn't want to be snooping, but when you're sitting on a cramped cabin and can only look at what is in front of you, it's kind of hard to ignore. 2 men were sitting next to me in the middle row and I declined to change my seat, which came with extra leg room. They turned to me and said the following: "That's the combat seat, Jonathan Livingston Seagull. If you gone by in the combat seat, then you got to be willing to blast up on some terries. Because with great power come great responsibility. Trust. This plane is being diverted from Stansted to Luton Airport due to Stansted being shut as a result of Air Force One taking off. This was 8 days ago. Followed by no one can leave the plane at Luton Airport as we're going to fly the plane back to Stansted, an 18-minute flight I timed. Americans being overly dramatic about their leaders as always. I was on a flight and happened to glance over and see the phone of the guy sitting next to me. He was scrolling TikTok and watched some clip of a girl dancing in revealing clothing. I'm not even convinced the girl in the video was of age, but anyways, this like 50-year-old dude just comments yummy and then keeps scrolling. On a particularly bumpy flight from Amsterdam to London, the pilot had to abort the first landing attempt because of strong crosswinds. The two English lads sitting next to me were convinced we were all going to die. The older Dutch gentleman behind me calls out to the stewardess, "Is this the pilot's first time flying?" Nothing too crazy. A couple in their 50s who were all over each other like tongues and ears, hands and pants etc. They were busy working out the logistics of their next getaway. They were both cheating on their partners and laughing at how gullible their souls were believing another business trip would come up so soon. Saw a scourged guy lean over to a fella reading a newspaper on the other side of the island say, "Give us a read of that when you're done with it." Newspaperman replies, "Nope. Scouse man, I'll fucking knock you out blah blah blah." Plane hadn't even taxied to the runway. Somewhat awkward flight to Benidorm ensued. I was the first one to the bathroom as soon as the seatbelt lights came off. As I opening the door, one of the flight attendants opens the curtain and I hear her saying like, "I hope those gorillas don't give us any trouble." There was a woman flying alone with her children and they were the only pox on the plane. I was in window seat, lady next to me, daughter on aisle side. She kept saying, "See, you can see the earth is really flat from up here. No curve at all etc." It was like she wanted me to go, "Oh wow, you're right. Bitch, if you think the earth is flat, I don't think you understand gravity enough, but somehow trust a plane."